Hello, welcome to the channel and thanks for watching. Now this is officially part 3 of the video series about my kitbashed Knight Titan, but you can watch it without seeing the first two if you want to. But in the first two videos I showed you the build, getting to the stage that you're seeing here. If you've watched those videos, just showing you some extra little bit of work I did after the video was technically complete. Wasn't quite happy with the underarm area, so I put a bit more milliput in there just to bulk out that underarm and make it fit the vision that I had a little bit more before we go into the painting. If you've not watched those two videos, I'll drop the links down below. You can go back and watch to see what I did to build this kitbash monstrosity that you see before you that I'm painting. So on to the painting now. So this has been sprayed black, it's then been sprayed with lead belcher to do a nice base coat of metallic, and that's typically how I do most of my 40k miniatures. And then we're starting off here with the Grell and Earth, which is a really cool Games Workshop technical paint, putting it onto a layer about 1 mil thick. And what that does when it dries, you'll see here, it cracks and flakes like this. So this has been left to dry overnight, and then from this we can build up some really nice damaged, battle-worn armour effects that you will see. Retributor armour, nice brass colour, and we're going around all the trim on the model. Now when I'm doing this paint scheme, I'm going to kind of treat it as a bit like a Death Guard paint scheme, but also like my Demon Army paint scheme. So if you've watched the channel, go remember what was in those. The Demon Army and the Death Guard Army, whilst they work together, get painted up in two very different ways. One's a standard paint scheme, so the Death Guard. One's a kind of more of a contrast paint scheme, which is my Demons. So you will see a mix of those two kind of schemes and ideas in this video. So we're starting off getting all those brass areas around the model done. So we've done the two metallics. You will notice I don't go back and do any normal metallics. That spray paint doesn't that work for us. Now what I'm doing is layering on the armour panel paint. So I'm using a German grey here because we're doing the House Maccabeus colour scheme, which is the knightly house that fought alongside Mortarion in the Heresy. And obviously now this has been one that's fought for 10,000 years and has now been demonically possessed. So layering that paint on very, very slowly. You'll see here putting it in tiny layers and leaving quite a lot of that brown showing through, because what I don't want to do is put too much over that crackle paint and start filling the gaps in. So you will see some brown areas showing up later on that will get covered, and you'll see how. Going on to the bone white here, onto the white areas, and again bone white's a really good colour to see sort of how slowly I'm building this up. So it is really very little paint going across, being very delicate, because what I don't want to do is fill the gaps and cracks where that cracked armour has come through. So, you know, really going over those areas very slowly, building it up nicely. If you put too much paint on at any one time, again, just take the rest of the paint off the brush and spread it around the area so that you're not swamping the Grell and Earth on here. Now, if you don't want to do the cracked armour effect, you don't fancy your Grell and Earth, well, then you would just paint these armour panels absolutely normally. What I'm also doing, if you notice here, is leaving a lot of the areas of that base metallic showing through. So around where we've drilled in the battle damage, I'm leaving that lead belcher showing through, kind of in the corners and the edges, and that all builds up the battered, bashed armour effect. Bones and horns, so obviously this is a kit bash, there's some weird parts of different models coming through here. The bones and horns are going to be done in exactly the same as with the armour panel, so it's the same bone white colour, but how we treat it later on in the paint scheme is going to define how it kind of looks in the final effect. What I always try and do with bone, you might go side to side, up and down, whatever, but I always try and go with the grain on the final effect. Now all the demonic parts of this build, so all the areas in between the armour panels and things, I'm treating with Rakarth flesh, and that's going to provide the base layer for the contrast paints we're going to use later on. So brightening that kind of thing up. Now what you're going to be careful of here is not leaving any of that metallic showing through any large areas. It's an absolute advantage to do that on the armour panels because bashed and cracked, but when you do it on the demonic area, you want to try and get that filled, a couple of thin layers, so that you're not leaving metallic showing through on the skin. Now, royal purple, in this case, is the colour scheme that I use for my Death Guard. So all my Death Guard tabards are all done in this purple. I want to tie this model into the army, so I'm using the same. Similarly, with the base, I've done the base to match my Death Guard army. So it's a base roller, and it's sort of textures and things on there to make it match in with my Death Guard. This can fight alongside my demons, obviously, because it's an allied kind of knight army, but I wanted the core of it to really kind of match the Death Guard basing. So if you watch the demon basing, you'll know I based that in one scheme, my Death Guard are based in another. And really just picking out some details on the base. So this base is kind of what I do if you've not watched that first video. I kind of save any bits of broken projects or offcuts and things like that in a little box with a bit of sand and some scrapings of plastic, and this is what forms this kind of basing material. I don't want to cover it all up, so what I'm doing is just painting some of the details, not going in any great depth. And then when I'm putting the brown layer on here, I'm kind of going around the larger chunks of plastic that are in there. And these literally are just peelings of plastic where I've built a model. Going around the larger chunks to kind of show some of the metallic colour showing through, but not being too precious about what we're doing. You will notice as well the Miasmic Malidifier on the base there. I did paint that with the Rakarth flesh as well, because we're going to treat that slightly differently to the skin on the actual build, but in a similar fashion with the contrast paints later on. Now, base edging, black is how I always do mine. You don't necessarily have to, but it ties in nicely with then doing the base and moving on to the weaponry that I'm painting in black here, like the gun casings, well, gun casings, missile casings. Now, for those observant ones amongst you, if you've watched the channel for a while, you'll know that I did a Knight Tyrant kit bash, well, not a kit bash, a Knight Tyrant conversion thing before, where I took the Knight Dominus and bashed it into a Chaos Knight Tyrant. And that's where I got the spare parts for this build. So this paint scheme is essentially exactly the same as that. The only difference really is in the flesh that's going to be on the demon. Now, with the gun casing in here in red, I probably should have put the Agrellan Earth over the gun casings as well so I could get that cracked effect. I didn't. It doesn't make a great deal of difference, but what I am doing is when I'm painting the red, leaving gaps and cracks and things to show the metal underneath. Now, this is Typhus Corrosion, which is a rust effect that Games Workshop do, and I'm putting it onto some of the metallic areas of the model, partly to make it nice and rusty, but the other thing I'm doing with it, if you noticed here, is covering up the mould lines that I somehow forgot to fix. And that's a great technique, especially with Nurgle. You make a mistake, you can cover it with Typhus Corrosion, you can cover it later on with Nurgle's Rot, you can cover it with Milliput to make it all possessed. That's a real benefit of doing a Nurgle army. Now, moving on to the pustuly bits that we've put in the build, painting these yellow, mostly as a base coat for the Nurgle's Rot we're going to use later on. So all the pustules and things around the model, and also the eyeball that's been put into the skull area is like the one big looming eye that I've got is painted up in yellow colour, which you'll see now as we come in here. Now, picking up some Screamer Pink onto the Nurgle symbols on the faceplate there. You'll notice here I started off with a size 3. Quickly clean it, drop it onto the table, and you can see in the background there, I moved to a size 1 brush because I was just getting the detail not quite right with a larger brush. Now, these, what I'm painting with now, are orange brushes, which I've been using for a couple of months, not sponsored in any way. They did give me a discount code when I did a video reviewing orange brushes. I'll link that down below and you can check that out. They are good brushes, been using them for a couple of months now, really enjoying them. And the reason I'm mentioning it is they haven't disabled my discount code yet. I had a subscriber tell me via a direct message on Instagram, your code is still working. So if you do want to order some orange brushes at a discount, go onto the Orange Brushes site and use code ADAM10. It is still functioning. Like I say, I get zero benefit from that code, no kickbacks, nothing. It's just they're good brushes and you might want to use that code, so go check it out. Now, a quick bit of wet blending on these tentacles here. Hopefully you've seen I put the Screamer Pink that we were using on the symbol at the end of the tentacle, and while it's still wet, I'm taking some Rakarth flesh, banging it into the Screamer Pink and effectively just smearing it around, and that will give a variety of pink colours down the length of that tentacle depending how much of Screamer Pink versus Rakarth is in there. Once I've done that, I then quickly clean the brush, go back into the Rakarth flesh and start from the base of the tentacle working towards the middle. And hopefully you can see there now, and a little bit of a dot on the end, you can see how it would make multiple different sort of pinky tones running up that tentacle. So that is super quick wet blending. Now we're going to move on to kind of the bit that's the more demonic painting in the thing is using contrast paints. So a quick bit of colour and flesh onto the pilot. I don't really do a great deal more on this. I'm not super focusing on him. You could go to town painting this pilot, but I don't. Quick bit of that. And then onto the skin tone of these demonic areas. And it's kind of matching what I did on the vast majority of my demon army. So working on the Plaguebearer flesh there, it's super quick, super easy. And I'm hoping it'll be a bridge between the two paint styles of the two armies that are very similar, but not quite the same. So Plaguebearer flesh around the vast majority of it, and then I'm dropping into the Majos flesh on areas where I think the skin is kind of damaged and weeping and where it would be maybe injured, so into that Majos purple, and then you blend them in together around the area, so you end up again with some different green and purple tones. So as I work through the flesh, that's kind of the method I do. Purple into areas where it looks like the skin has been broken, or there's an interesting, maybe around the skull or around the missile in this case, and then dropping in with the green, and then when you put that green on, moving it into the purple, or vice versa, the purple into the green, and it kind of blends together and puts a few different nice colours onto the skin there, and I think looks really nice as we're doing it. So over the entire model in that vein, just using these two colours, going around the kind of yellow pustule areas where we've done that before, but if you go over it doesn't much matter, but the sort of neater you can be, the better when you're doing it. Now we're going to go through 2 game washes. The first wash I'm going to do here is probably my favourite for doing, dirty, grimdark kind of paint schemes, and this is the Vallejo Sepia Game Wash. This is a mucky, dirty, all over kind of wash that really grimes down the model. Doing a good layer on this, but I'm only putting it on the, this is the right word, natural areas or mechanical areas. So all the armour panels, all the kind of weaponry, all that kind of stuff, I'm not putting it on the demonic flesh areas. And this is how I'm going to differentiate this kind of build. So all of the rest of the model, and let it thoroughly dry overnight. You can see here it really, really grimes it up. Then I'm taking Games Workshop Seraphim Sepia. The footage went a bit wrong here. I'm using, for this one, you're using a fat old brush, doesn't matter what you use. Probably don't use your best sable brushes for doing this. But this is going on the demonic areas. So this is a much, much lighter wash. It's a little bit more shiny. It's more of a satin effect. It doesn't dirty it down much more. And really, you don't have to do a great deal after this wash has dried to the demonic areas. In fact, virtually nothing, or actually nothing afterwards. So it's a totally different type of wash, and that's the wash I used on my demon army. So we've done both of those washes, and honestly, while the Seraphim Sepia is drying, I started working on the base and some other areas. So now the washes are on there, and now they're going to dry. Most of the rest of the paint scheme is just reusing the paint you've already done and going around and kind of highlighting up those areas you've gone through. So seeing on the base here, just dry brushing up. Some people don't like using paper for dry brushing, some do. I don't typically do it on the actual model. I'll do it on more of a synthetic, like dry brush palette. But for basing, it's just quicker using a bit of toilet paper sometimes, because my dry brush palette was covered in paint still, and it's just easier. But dry brushing up on the base here, and then a similar thing when you're doing the rest of the model, touching back up all those areas with the paint you've already used. And with the Vallejo Sepia wash, because it dirties it down so much, it almost looks like you're using a whole other paint. You're not using the same ones you've already used, but then it looks like you've put a lot of effort into the highlighted and those kind of things. You can see here with the black, even the black after that wash has been changed in its tone. So just putting these colours onto the ends, onto the areas where the light's going to have hit, etc., to make it look like we've done a real nice highlight layer. Slightly different when we come to the armour panels. That's going to work differently, but the rest of it, this is the kind of theme, using all those paints we've already used, and just dropping them into the sort of raised areas, not going into the edges, not covering the whole area we've already used, to give a really, really nice highlight effect. And it's super quick, super easy. And if you use a wet palette, which I do, all these paints are pretty much still on the wet palette and still usable from when you used it for the base coats, which is really nice. Now, a 3-stage wash effect over the kind of burny areas, if that makes sense. So the melter gun ends, the ends of the flamers, and then the exhaust vents that come out of the model. So there's 3 paints we're using here, and if you've watched the channel before, you know that this is a technique I do all the time. But we start off with Druchii Violet, and we basically cover all of the brass areas that we want to look burnt. Then, when that's mostly dry, go in with Drakenhof Nightshade and cover maybe half of the area. And then a final bit, Null Oil at the end, and maybe just cover about maybe a quarter of what's left. And that gives a really nice kind of burnt wash kind of effect. And you see here, just going over the other paints, so in with the yellow, just on the pustules. And now we're coming to the bit that's a little bit different. What we're doing here is we're not edge highlighting as such, we are painting over the whole panel. Again with the German grey, again you can see on that panel how many colours it looks like there are already, because we've used obviously the Grell and Earth and then the grey over the top, and it kind of looks like 3 or 4 different colours already. There isn't. And what we're doing here now is a very, very light layer across all of the panel. The paint is very watered down, it's very thin, and you can see here when I'm putting it on, I am moving it along and across a lot of this armour panel. So we're really putting a very, very, very thin layer on, following the same principles as when we put the initial layers on, avoiding those areas where we've left the metal showing through, not going into the gaps and cracks and things, and just keeping it here. Again, it stands out way more when I show you the effect done on the white. Obviously white comes out on camera a bit more, so you can see very, very small amounts of paint, building it up very, very slowly. And the whole purpose of this is to make that area look like there's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different colours all kind of merging and blending together through the armour. So you're not putting this on as a layer, it's almost a wash. It's not quite, because we're using neat paint, we're not super watering it down or anything, but if you do put too much on, you can lick the brush like I did, which is a bit gross, but that's how we do it, and spread the kind of paint around. So really, really thin layers, take your time. It's almost a wash, it's almost a dry brush. I don't know what you'd call this technique, it's probably halfway between the two. I'm kind of dry brushing, but I'm kind of washing. It's a bit of both. practice with it on a blank piece of plastic somewhere if you want to sort of test that. But we're showing hopefully through there all the different colour layers that are coming through. So you couldn't say that these armour panels are now bone white, because they're not. There's all sorts of different colours from the washes, and they're slowly layering up, and it makes it, I think, look really nicely grimdark and nurgly and a little bit gross. So you can see there again, brush went in the mouth. I know it's a gross thing to do. You might want to put it in water and clean it on a piece of paper, but if you put too much paint on, that's the technique. Now, again, with the bone white, a nice, simple dry brush across all the brown areas of the base. It just adds an extra little tone and an extra little highlight layer. And I also do that across the Daemonic malignifier on the base. I completely forgot to show you and didn't video it, but the Daemonic malignifier kind of skin area that's been painted, where we went over that Rakarth flesh, I did it with a Guilliman flesh when I did the pilot. And a quick dry brush over and we're done. Now, this is the first new paint in this stage. This is Dirty Down Verdigris. There are other Verdigris things available. I used Games Workshop Nylock Oxide for a long time, and I still really like that paint. This is just that little bit better. Did a video on them on the channel, so I have a hunt for that in the hobby playlist, whatever it was called. I think I called it Hobby Tools or something. But just putting on some very small spots of that Dirty Down Verdigris tends to put it on the rivets or where the brass has been damaged, and it just adds again another nice kind of aged effect to that verdigris. Final sort of Nurgly effect is Nurgle's Rot. This is your friend if you are a Nurgle player. I put a little bit too much on these pustule bits, so I'm spreading it around, but then all we're doing here is going anywhere we painted those yellow pustules and kind of painting over those, running it down, making it look like it's dripping onto the floor, and just really kind of finalising that Nurgly bit. We can see I didn't like how I'd done those first few bits, so I keep putting the brush into that area and taking some off before going back in the pot necessarily. So again, this is your friend if you're making mistakes at this kind of area. If you've got the wrong paint covering the wrong area, put a bit of Nurgle's Rot over it, hide it, you'll be fine, but really make it run down. And there you can see the kind of final effect. So we're battle damaged, we're scarred, we've got Nurgle's Rot pouring out of the bullet holes, and this is going to tie in really, really nice with the Nurgle army. So I hope you like the video. It's a very long one for me. Normally I keep the videos about 10 minutes, but I really I don't know the word enjoyed this build. It was a long one. I've had a very busy time at work and then went on holiday and stuff. So it's been a long build. I really enjoy the final effect though. I think this is going to work really nicely with Deathguard Armor Demons. Plenty more Nurgle stuff on the channel. And again, check out the videos that showed you the build of this model if you liked what this final effect was. So I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. And I will see you on the channel again.